Wife wanted cake after eating it. Husband, oop, discovers it in unfortunate circumstances. I am not oop. Original post by You Crush Survivor 123 in R. Surviving Infidelity in R. Cheating Stories. Oop has posted largely the same text of the initial post in both subreddits. I have reproduced text from Surviving Infidelity, but Cheating Stories thread is also linked. Trigger warnings are as a measure of caution. If you disagree, please ignore them. It is better to err on the side of caution when mentioning triggers. Trigger warnings: infidelity, violence and assault, abusive relationship, less than, mood spoilers, sad, unfortunate for OOP's wife, things, mostly, improve for OOP, less than. Discovered my wife's, now ex, affair the day she was admitted into hospital. Now years later she can't accept my engagement to my fiancé. Link Surviving Infidelity. September 13, 2020. Also posted in Cheating Stories. If ever there was a prize for the most horrible way to learn of your significant other's affair, I would probably win it and be in its Hall of Fame. Like so many people in this sub, I suddenly found myself as a member of a club that nobody ever wants to be part of. I will never forget the sound of my ex-sister-in-law's voice as she kept saying, I'm sorry, over and over on the phone while I drove home from a week-long business trip. I was confused and had absolutely no idea what she meant, but only after I managed to calm her down somewhat did she inform me that my wife was in hospital and that I needed to hurry home. My mind went into overdrive as I tried to get more information as well as not crash while I began speeding to get there faster. The only thing she told me is that it was an assault, then cut the call and wouldn't answer when I tried to call her again. A bit of background. My ex and I met in our mid-20s. It was through a mutual friend at a barbecue. At first she seemed almost too good to be true. Not only was she incredibly beautiful, but she was also shy and introverted. It took a while for us to officially date, but once it happened I was over the moon. When we first tried to get intimate, she suddenly started crying. Should have taken this as a bad sign. I freaked out and thought it was something I did, but she apologized the next day and told me she was triggered. As it turns out, 2 years before meeting me she was in a long-term relationship and a guy that was abusive both emotionally, physically as well as mentally. He would degrade her during their moments of intimacy, then apologize afterward. She had a flashback but reassured me it had nothing to do with me, so we took things slow as she was still in therapy. It was tough, but because I loved her I believed once we got over this it would make our relationship stronger, and for a while it honestly appeared that way. Fast forward another year and we'd gotten engaged. First time intimacy also happened during this stage. I was fortunate enough to be able to buy a house for us courtesy of inheritance from my late uncle. Things were going great and I half seriously suggested we plant a peach tree. Important for later on, to signify new beginnings, and she was all for it. We were wedded not long after that, and quite frankly it was absolutely amazing. Of course we had our normal ups and downs like every married couple, but I considered us more lucky. Because she always made it a point to never go to bed upset with each other, and she would always point out gently if I did anything to upset her. Sometime later life basically happened and I was promoted at my job. It meant more pay, but it also meant I would be traveling more for work, conferences and business meetings. I noticed she had been getting down a lot more and wasn't being as intimate as before. She would keep her phone close to her and even stopped gently addressing things that upset her. I tried to talk to her about it, but she assured me that she was fine and this was a phase she was going through, and having no reason to not trust her I let it go. She would sometimes go to her sister's place and spend the night, telling me she just needed a bit of girl time with her sister. The day I got that fateful phone call was the day she was meant to be keeping her sister company. Again, I remember rushing into the hospital, barely breathing and frantically asking about my wife when world's most understanding and patient police officer sat me down to explain what happened. He told me he was a friend of my Sil and he happened to respond to a domestic disturbance call. He arrived on the scene to find a couple fighting. The supposed boyfriend was on top of the female punching her and she was screaming trying to scratch him. This didn't make any sense to me because 1. This had nothing to do with my wife because we're married, and 2. Literally everyone who knew my wife knew she wouldn't do that. He gave me a knowing look and placed his hand on my shoulder, then told me to be very calm because said girlfriend was actually my wife. If it weren't for the severity of the situation I would have laughed in his face, but something in the way he said everything made me believe him. I then was ushered in by a nurse to see my wife, and what greeted me to this day I still can hardly find the words to describe it. I just stood there for what seemed like an eternity. Then a doctor came in and explained her injuries to me. The jaw was slightly fractured. Her left eye was completely swollen shut and had massive bruising covering half of her face, as well as 3 broken ribs. Then the doctor dropped another bomb and told me she was pregnant. I still couldn't understand how this happened. Then I caught sight of her sister. She at first tried to avoid me, but at the persuasion of her police officer friend she told her what she knew. It turns out my wife's ex had gotten in contact with her 5 months ago. He was doing this redemption pyramid step thing where he would apologize to people he has wronged in order to clear his karma. Anyone else BS meter going crazy right now. They began talking more, then he convinced her to meet up for coffee and show her he was a changed man. Obviously old feelings resurfaced, coupled with the fact that he appeared changed. Now it soon developed into an emotional affair. My wife approached her sister for advice, who told her to take things slow and just get it out of her system if she needed to, which then led to a physical affair 3 months later. She actually told my wife that she should at least make peace with her ex in whatever form it may be, and even offered to cover for my wife once in a while. My Sil was in tears at this point and kept apologizing to me, saying that she didn't know about the abuse as my wife never told anyone other than me and her therapist at the time about it. I was numb. I just couldn't feel anything and was absolutely dumbfounded by my wife's actions. When my wife finally woke up I was there and she burst into tears upon seeing me. I spent the following months in zombie flight mode. There was individual counseling for her as well as marriage counseling for us at the strong urging of her family. In counseling she was surprisingly forthcoming about how it happened and how she absolutely hated herself for causing me pain. She mentioned how at one point on her way home from his place she actually fantasized about driving into the river because she smelled like him and didn't want his scent to corrupt me. However, that made sense. She said she tried to end it but was too weak, and only after learning that she was pregnant that it actually woke her up and made her realize that any further contact with this man was toxic to not only her but the unborn child as well, hence went to end things in person for good when he snapped on her. She became a shell of herself and developed a phobia for any other males but me. She one point she couldn't even use the bathroom at night unless I was holding her hand. Sad, right? After the baby was born, son by the way, we got a paternity test and he was mine. But the more time I spent with her the more I realized I didn't hate my wife. I actually loathed her. I couldn't see the woman I married but instead saw his leftovers each time I looked at her. I decided to leave because I was afraid I'd do something I'd regret and be exactly like her abusive ex. She begged me not to leave and even made the ridiculous offer of giving me a hall pass, as well as slapping her if I wanted to. I knew at this point I had to get out. She was actually very generous during the divorce. She moved back into her parents and signed a very well thought out co-parenting plan issued by the courts. Moving forward 3 years later, and I meet my now fiancé by chance. I was in a bookstore with a buddy of mine and we were discussing Egyptian mythology when this beautiful woman approached me to correct me on my pronunciations of the Egyptian gods and cities. Needless to say, immensely impressed by not only her understanding but also by the fact that she is Egyptian herself. We exchanged numbers which eventually lead us to dating. When I finally proposed to her, it was actually in front of the peach tree I had planted years ago. I got down on one knee, but before I got my answer she ran into the house, then came out with a ring as well. Turns out she was actually planning on proposing herself because she was madly in love with me and she just didn't want any other woman to have me. My son, in all his sweet childlike innocence, told his mother what happened because he was present when it happened. My ex literally showed up that night in the rain yelling about how could I propose to her, my fiancé, in front of our tree, and that this isn't the end of us. I am completely exhausted at this point. I cannot go and see because she is the mother of my child, but she is basically harassing me and my fiancé. How do I convince her to move on? To get over her fear of men and not force me to get a restraining order? Sorry it was long, but I am really desperate. Edit. Wanted to ask a question to the insightful women of Reddit. Something that still bugs me to this day is the fact that she even made time for her ex, who took pleasure in destroying her only for her to suffer a much worse fate. Is it normal for the abused to want the attention of the abuser even if she might hate him? Something my ex said once. Edit 2. Forget to add this in the original post. When my fiancé presented me with the ring which she was gonna use to propose to me, she had an engraving on the inner band which states, "To my pharaoh, damn I love this woman." OOP's response to a comment on ex's behavior being a coping mechanism. This is really insightful. She has told me she hates how she felt like she needed him at the time. How she knew it was destroying our marriage. Destroying me and destroying her. She knew she didn't love him. Was and still continues to be adamant about this fact. But he was like a sweet poison she couldn't stop drinking. Like someone blindfolded her eyes a bit too tightly and pushed her into cold water. She said getting pregnant with our son was the best thing other than marrying me that has ever happened to her. It tore the blindfold off her eyes and seemingly woke her up, so to speak. She realized she was still his prisoner and wanted nothing more than to be free of him and be the best mother and wife she could be. She said she was a fool for ever responding to his message when he reached out, and wishes she could slap some sense into her younger self and scream at herself to run for the hills. Metaphorically speaking. Discovered my wife's, now ex, affair the day she was admitted into hospital. Now years later she can't accept my engagement to my fiancé. Update. Shout out to Mama 202,045. Link surviving infidelity. October 4th, 2020. Wow, didn't expect this type of response. Thank you all so much for your support and kind words. Both for me, my fiancé and my ex. It's sad that my situation with my ex and her abusive past isn't as uncommon as I thought. Reading some of your similar cases really makes one almost lose hope, but glad to see some people have recovered from them. Now for what has happened since my first post. First off, a big thank you to user Mama 202,045 inches for your simple yet amazing advice. Saved us a lot of trouble. Now on to what has happened so far. Since my last post, my son's birthday was coming up and he told us he wanted to have a camp night for it. Now I must explain, the boy absolutely loves the outdoors. Everything from camping to hiking to even playing in rivers are his favorite, and obviously due to the ongoing situation we cannot go to our usual spots. so I offered my backyard for it. Another request he had was for my ex to sleep over as well. He wanted to imitate a scene from one of his kid adventure shows where both parents are sitting on either of the child and all three are roasting marshmallows on the campfire. Now I had absolutely no intention of denying my son's birthday wishes, but at the same time I couldn't have my ex sleep in the same tent as me and my son. That would be far too disrespectful to my fiancé, even though she said she understood. It was clear she wasn't okay with it. My ex seemed to take advantage of this and kept saying how much she was looking forward to spending the night with her two men, and even went as far as to buy a whole lot of camping equipment that would put Bear Grylls to shame. She was certainly trying to rub it in my fiancé's face and wasn't graceful about it either. I had to tell her to stop a couple of times, but she only relented when I threatened to invite her sister. Ever since our divorce, my ex has had a burning hatred for her sister. She, my ex, acknowledges her role in the destruction of our marriage but blames her sister for encouraging the affair and not safeguarding from her making choices that would ruin hers, but more importantly, according to her, our life together. It's gotten so bad that she refuses to let her sister spend any significant amount of time with our son, which at one point caused my ex Sil to have severe depression. My ex Sil has been trying for years to reconcile with her sister, but it just seems to get worse as time goes on. A Redditor, Mama 202,045 inches, offered me a simple and effective solution. She suggested I go out and purchase a multi-room tent, that way my fiancé could be included. I wasted no time and immediately went out to get one. Of course my ex wasn't too happy about that, but was glad to be under the same roof as me. During the birthday celebration, my son was on cloud 9. He ran around the yard and pretended he was a great explorer discovering a new land. When evening came, I made the fire and my ex provided the marshmallows. He excitingly sat between us and started roasting his marshmallow alongside us. What I didn't expect was after we were done taking pictures and making s'mores, he handed my fiancé a stick and a marshmallow as well and sat next to her to make his second s'more. It's honestly a mystery how something this pure and perfect could come out of the absolute mess that was the relationship between me and my ex. My ex asked for a bit of my time, to which I obliged. We stepped into the kitchen and she apologized for her behavior on the day that I proposed, but not for her actions following that. She told me she still sees me as her husband in her mind, so the thought of me giving my heart to another terrified her. She said she never wanted to cause me pain and would give anything to go back in time and undo her mistakes. She mentioned how happy she was when the paternity test showed that I was the father, because she thought it was a new beginning for us and that he was proof our love. I thanked her for the courage to share all this, but told her I was happy with where I was in life and with whom I was with, but hoped she would find someone to make her happy as well. She said she meant what she told on the day we divorced and will wait for me. I left the kitchen feeling exhausted because none of what I was trying to say got through to her. We decided to call it a night, where me and my fiancé slept in one room of the tent and my ex with my son in another. All in all, a good birthday for my son, but not so good night for me. That's things so far, and promise to update if anything major happens. If anyone is able to find the comment by Mama 202,045 being referred to, please help me out and I'll update the post. Oop has not posted in almost 2 years. Reminder, I am not the original poster. Cake. Jesus. 3 years later and she's still holding on to this illusion that Oop is her husband and that he will forgive her and eventually things will go back to the way they were. I hope she gets a therapist, a good one. Why do I keep clicking on these titles thinking they're going to be about literal cake? This has to be the 3rd or 4th time and I just don't learn. I hope the ex-wife finds a new therapist. The fact she imploded her entire existence isn't a glowing recommendation for the previous one. She had it all. I'm really glad to see that Oop has avoided the potential landmine of drama that reconciling with his ex would have been. It's hopeful to think she's learned her lesson and won't go back to her abuser. But if she's lonely enough, it's hard to say. I can sympathize that leaving an abusive relationship is hard, but I can never understand people who cheat on those they came to love, or those that facilitate it like Sil. And now of course she thinks Oop will come back. Because in her mind, of course you go back to the person that hurts you. Yikes. My Sil was in tears at this point and kept apologizing to me, saying that she didn't know about the abuse. I think this is the least important issue she needs to apologize for. What a miserable situation altogether. But even worse that the sister encouraged the cheating at all. Oh gosh. What a situation. I understand that the ex-wife is acting this way due to past trauma. But at some point she needs to let go and realize she's never going to get her old life back. Buddhism is right when it says that the root cause of suffering is attachment and not realizing that everything is temporary. She needs to realize that it's over and that she can't be stuck on him because he isn't coming back to her. X seems very intent on getting Oop back. Weird how people figure out how much they love their ex after they get caught cheating and get dumped. One thing I would like to point out is that Bear Grylls doesn't use much camping equipment. That is his thing. I remember this story. I stand by my original statement. The ex needs a better therapist. The ex went through a horrid experience. Doesn't matter if she was cheating. She did not deserve to be assaulted. Hopefully she's doing better and her and Op are great co-parents. Wow. I honestly feel so bad for the guy. Hopefully the ex eventually got the message that she destroyed her future with Oop. EX Sil is an underrated LVP of this story. I get that she didn't know it was abusive. But who encourages their sister to cheat on their husband? OOP's new fiancé should run from this hot mess like her ass was on fire and her hair is about to catch. Damn. Just damn. You know something like this is almost always going to end in divorce. I just can't fathom going through something like this and still assuming the person would take them back. Good find, but this is definitely not a cake scenario. Like, I get she went through a lot of trauma and is fixated on him. But at this point I don't see his nice side stepping the situation as helping. I think he needs to tell her what exactly he thinks of her and how she needs to accept it. He has probably heard 100x everything she has thought and was expected to put up with it for her sake. But at this point needs to tell her the truth. That he never see a future with someone he loathes. It will hurt for her, but he has every right to be happy again. And she did nothing but cause this for herself. I hate how she still blames her sister. Like she obviously isn't taking credit for her part like it says, because someone can tell you to do something and try to convince you all day long, but it comes down to you as a person to make that decision. No one forced her to have an affair, they just offered the opportunity. Don't get me wrong, the sister is a horrible human being for that, but she needs to realize she was the problem for accepting it. And to claim she didn't love him makes it even worse, because she destroyed something she did love over something she didn't. It's a sad story for Oop, but I'm glad to see he is finding happiness and trying to make co-parenting work for the betterment of their kid. Shouldn't this be flared as a repost? I know I've read this on BoRU before. Does anyone else find it creepy that Oop was immensely impressed by the fact that his fiancée is Egyptian herself. IDKY. But that just weirded me out. As nuts as the mom is, she must be doing an effective job of keeping some of that insanity in check, because their son just seems like a wonderful joy. And kids of divorced parents often are incredibly attuned to their parents' problems, but this kid just seems happy. And that's honestly great. Hurt people. Hurt people can only excuse so much. I hope she gets the help she needs, because at this rate, her delusions about their relationship will make it really difficult for their son.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.